Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Conversations Live, where we connect you with the artists and authors you love who bring you the music and books you can't get enough of. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb, and first I'd like to thank those joining us at 92.3 FM and also those joining us online through blogtalkradio.com, either through our live chat, our switchboard, or our podcast. We welcome all of you to our program. I want to first of all thank all of you who joined us for yesterday evening's broadcast. We had Steve Hippolite on the program and also Dr. I. Major on to talk about how books have changed their lives and some of the projects that they're working on for 2010. We had over 3,000 of you join us online for those discussions, and we definitely appreciate you being with us for that special edition of our program. Today we're going to be speaking with the author of actually two books. I've actually read his second book, The Broken Road, but Keifer's going to be joining us to talk to us a little bit about himself, his new book, and also what he hopes all of you learn from what he encountered, and how all of us really have a little bit of investigative reporting in us. So please help me welcome Keifer to the program. How you doing, man?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Good. Welcome to Conversations Live.
Thank you.
All right. Well, look, before we get into the new book, The Broken Road, I want to talk a little bit about yourself. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Well, I was born and, for the most part, raised in a small community on the outskirts of New Orleans in Terrebonne Parish. It's called Grand Caillou, and it sits on the Gulf Coast. I was educated at Nicholls State University, and I spent a large part of my life, my adult life, in Atlanta, Georgia, where I worked for a number of companies as a corporate trainer, and I worked in upper retail management. What I also did was, I also volunteer a lot of my time to organizations such as the NAACP. With the NAACP, I actually learned a lot of my investigative skills. I was the chairman for the state of Georgia, the Labor and Industry Committee, because I have a passion or an affinity for helping people who are being treated unfairly in the workplace. So for the last 10 years of my life, that's what I've been doing, pretty much. Well, people who need help have been finding me or seeking me out, and I've been finding great pleasure and joy in doing that.
Okay. You know, I mentioned, Keifer, in my introduction of you, that you really show that all of us kind of have that I think that drive sometimes to be able to help individuals, especially when we see people being taken advantage of. Is that something, even before you got in the workplace, when you were growing up, did you realize that about yourself, or did others realize that?
Yes, I've always been a fighter for the underdog. I just never could stand sitting back and watching and doing nothing. I felt that inaction, of just sitting back and watching as things happen, it's just wrong. When you are put in a situation where you witness things that are wrong, I've just always believed you're supposed to find a way to stand up and to act out and to help the people who are affected by the adverse actions. So my parents brought me up to always look at my fellow man and to do whatever I can to help. And I know for a large part that was instilled by my grandmother into my grandfather. So that's what I do.
Now, you mentioned, of course, working in the corporate world, but writing sometimes is a different animal all on its own. When did you realize you had an interest in writing, and in particular, writing stories and writing books that were based on your own experiences?
Well, I had always known that I was a writer. I always enjoyed writing and excelled in it. In college, I received very high marks. Even after college, when I'd write short stories, I'd receive high marks, and people were generally interested in the things that I'd written. I didn't know that I would become a writer, or that I would write books. That's something that I just didn't foresee. But just a few years ago, I was put in a situation where an employee, one of the most powerful women in the world, and I had some conversations. and he shared some very disturbing information about work conditions at Harpo Films, Oprah Winfrey's company. At the time, I didn't believe the employee, and I put my investigative skills to work. And my investigative skills called for asking the same question in a number of different ways to see if the person is going to give the same answer. And I also research the answers that are given to make sure that the information is based in reality and in truth. Once I did the research, and it gave me an abundance of information to research, and realized that what he was saying was true, I knew that I would have to document it in some way. I would have to write a book or expose this information because too many people were being affected in a negative way. My intent was to write a book because I didn't think that I would be able to reform the workplace without a book. Sometimes, even working in the NAACP, I found that you can work very hard to get people to do the right thing or to reform their workplace, but all of that falls on a deaf ear until you expose them. And then once they are exposed, then they start taking the steps that are needed to reform. So I contacted Harpo Films and made them aware of my intention to write a book, my first book, Ruthless. I was told by an attorney that I had to make them aware of the allegations that had been made, which I did. And at first they denied the allegations, and when they realized I had done the research and that I knew the truth, then they started saying that they wanted to resolve their issues internally. They didn't want it to become public. So we had dialogue for about 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden come these nasty letters, and that's what big companies always do. They threaten you. So I received one of the ugliest, most threatening letters I had ever received. And at that time, I still wanted to write a book. So I contacted my attorney, and I told him to protect me legally so that I could write this book and expose the truth. Well, the attorney then got involved, and he spoke to them, and before I knew anything, he was telling me that the simplest thing that I could do was to sell my book rights to Oprah Winfrey and to allow them to reform their workplace on their own. So I told him I wasn't interested in that. They had 20 years, and she'd been on air a little over 20 years by that time, and the pattern had been developed in 20 years, and I just didn't have confidence that she would reform her workplace. But he was adamant. He said that I should sell. So still I wanted to write a book. And needless to say, I fired my attorney and spoke to Oprah's attorney a number of times after that. And, of course, a part of my investigative skills is recording conversations. I always record conversations when unfair treatment is being brought to my attention, because I use those recordings to gain a greater understanding of what is going on and to also try to determine or figure out what I'm going to do about it. Right. Well, that attorney threatened me, and, he said that I'd better sell the book rights to him. It's in my best interest. If not, they had hired this mad cow attorney. His name was Chip Babcock, and they would let him loose on me, and they'd make my life a living hell. So I spoke to my attorney again. He advised me that everything was legal. I got another attorney who was a mediator. She advised me that everything was legal. But still, I felt like I was being lured into a trap. And the attorneys started talking again, and the more they talked, the more I felt like I was being lured into a trap. So finally, I decided that I would resolve the issue myself and speak to Oprah's attorney myself and just resolve it. So when I spoke to him again, I made him totally aware that my full intention was to expose the truth, and I wanted that workplace reformed because too many people had suffered there. Too many people were denied advancement, employment opportunities, denied advancement in the company, were looked over. And so he assured me that they would take every step that they possibly could to reform the environment. And he also told me that he'd like for me to sell and we spoke about a confidentiality agreement and so on and so forth. Again, all on tape. And because I felt like I was being set up, I started speaking about extortion. I used the word extortion. And I said, I do not want to be lured into an extortion trap. And if you feel that in any way this is extortion, I don't want any parts of it. And, of course, I understood that he was making the offer, but I felt like I was being set up, so I needed to bring that out. Well, he said that this wasn't extortion. He was making the offer, and we wound up settling on a figure. He wanted to pay me $1.5 million. I thought it was an excessive figure. I told him that. It was much higher than I had anticipated, but he said that this is for my silence throughout a lifetime, and he was very comfortable paying that figure. Well, the very next day, when we were supposed to finalize the arrangement, the FBI arrested me. And I knew the entire time that I was being set up, but I was shocked at the moment that it happened because I didn't think that even the most powerful woman in the world could use connections with the FBI to have me arrested. Mm-hmm. They came into my home. They removed a lot of tapes. They took my computer and a number of other things. And for a few days, I felt totally helpless. I mean, it was the worst time of my life, of my adult life. And I didn't know what to do, really. And as I was contemplating all kinds of things, I realized they had not gotten the tapes that they thought they had gotten. All of the tapes that proved my innocence were still in my possession. So they pressed this charge. It was supposed to be under government seal, and this information was never supposed to become public. A few days later, I was watching the world news, and a breaking story came out. Keifer Bonvillain has been arrested for allegedly extorting Oprah Winfrey. And it just was a moment that I just couldn't believe. It was on CNN and just all over every newscast in the world. It was a very interesting time for me. Reporters from around the country, from around the world, were seeking me out, trying to get a story. They wanted the tapes. The Inquirer and a number of other tabloids were after me, trying to get the tapes. They wanted the story. And I knew at that time that I was going to write this book. I absolutely knew that I would write a book and I would expose everything, including the setup. But the first order of business was getting the charges dropped. So for 4 months, I listened to prosecutors trying to convince me to give them the tapes, and they were trying to figure out how to bargain to get the charges dropped and for me to give the tapes up and for the story to never go any further. Well, I decided after 4 months to speak to a prosecutor, a local prosecutor here in Louisiana, and he told me that their job is to try to put me away. They set me up, and my only course of action should be to expose the truth. And he said, you have the truth. It's on tape. You should release an excerpt and let the American public and the world know you didn't commit the crime that you've been charged with. So I released a small excerpt to Radar magazine of a conversation I had with Oprah Winfrey's attorney. And when I released that excerpt, the charges 2 hours later were dismissed. And they called and they told me that I would have to come up to Chicago one more time. I'd been there 3 times, I think 2 or 3 times. But they said I needed to come up one more time and to finalize an agreement. They dismissed the charges in a pretrial diversion. And many people told me or advised me that a pretrial diversion was unheard of and never offered in an extortion case, but it was given to me as a means of dismissing this high-profile, what was at the time, or what could have been one of the most high-profile cases in the United States. This was a way for them to get rid of it. It didn't require me to plead guilty to anything. They had already taken my gun. They said that they didn't want me to carry a handgun for a year, take a drug test. Well, I'd never used drugs, so I said I'd take a drug test and perform 50 hours of community service. Well, my attorney and I went back and forth over the community service because I felt I did nothing wrong. And he said, well, Keifer, you volunteer your time all the time anyway to the NAACP and a number of other organizations. Just go right ahead on and continue your volunteerism, and we'll go ahead on and get these charges dropped. You've gone up against the most powerful woman in the world and the most powerful law enforcement in the world and agency in the world, and they cannot prosecute you. They didn't have enough evidence to indict you. Usually that happens after 7 days. It had been 4 months. There was no indictment. He said, let's get this behind you, and you can move forward with your book. So that's what I did. I got that behind me, and I moved forward, and I published Ruthless, which is an expose on Oprah Winfrey's business empire, and it also contains a lot of behind-the-scenes information about celebrities who visit her show and her personal life. I was totally satisfied with the publication of the first book, and I didn't think that I would write again for a number of years. I thought I was pretty much finished with writing for a while. My life changed drastically because now I had media personalities and tabloid reporters hounding me constantly, and I needed to slip away. So I slipped away back to my hometown, to my parents' home, and just as I was settling in and trying to figure out what my next step would be, what I would do in life from that point forward, a hurricane was projected to hit their hometown, a direct hit. They refused to leave. Well, my father was stubborn. My mother wanted to leave. My father didn't want to leave. So I decided I couldn't leave him, an elderly man, in the house alone, and that I would stay with him. And the events that followed the hurricane prompted me to write yet another book. And so I guess the exposés just happened because they are real-life stories, things that actually took place in my life that I felt needed to be shared with the world.
All right. For those that are joining us, you're listening to Conversations Live on 92.3 FM and also blogtalkradio.com. We're speaking with Keifer Bonvillain. He's the author of the book Ruthless, and also the new book is The Broken Road to Disaster Recovery. A great book. I've read the second book. I have not read the first book, but I've read the second book, and it definitely is a powerful story. Keifer, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, though, I want to ask you why. Why is it after everything you went through with the first book, why is it that you would put not only another expose together, but also put your life in danger again? We're going to talk about that when we come back, okay?
Okay.
We're going to turn it over to 92.3 FM. Here is Jill Scott with Hate on Me. We'll be right back with more Conversations Live and Keifer Bonvillain. Stay with us. That was Jill Scott with Hate on Me, courtesy of 92.3 FM. You're listening to Conversations Live. We're speaking with author Keifer Bonvillain. He's joined us today to speak to us a little bit about himself and also about his writing career. He's the author of two books, the first being Ruthless. The second one is The Broken Road. Both are considered exposés that are really exposing what are seen as injustices. Now, Keifer, before we went to that break, I said when we came back, I wanted to ask you why. Why would you put yourself in a position to go through all of this again by writing this second book, The Broken Road?
Well, certainly I recognize from the first book and all the ordeal that I went through that I was putting my life on the line again. And even when I was moving forward with the publication of Ruthless, to a large extent I felt like I was in danger for a number of reasons. But what I witnessed and the things that I expose are things that I feel the American people and people around the world need to know. And one of the reasons why I continue to put myself in the forefront or put my life in danger in exposing these companies, these very powerful companies, is because I listened to Dr. King a number of years ago, and he said something to the effect, if a man doesn't have a cause in which he is willing to die, then that man isn't fit to live. And that resonated in my spirit. I can't sit back and allow people to walk in darkness or to move in darkness and to be taken advantage of and to be denied advancement opportunities. I can't sit back and allow women to be sexually exploited and sexually harassed, and be in a position where I can do something but yet turn a blind eye because I'm afraid that the company is going to attack me or that somebody's going to try to kill me. Of course, I've gotten death threats with both books, from a number of places. A lot of negative email because people don't generally like this stuff coming out about them. But I think it's the right thing to do, and if the companies and the people involved didn't want this information to come to the forefront, I'm just a firm believer that they shouldn't engage in the activity. And it's my responsibility, I think, once I have witnessed something as explosive as the things that I've witnessed, it's my responsibility then to step forward and to do whatever it takes to make sure that what happened to these people never happened to anybody else or happens to anybody else. So that's the reason why.
Okay. Again, the second book is entitled The Broken Road. You can find out more information about it by going to the website, thebrokenroad.com. To find out information, really, it'll also take you to information about the first book as well, but also let you know more information about Keifer. Keifer, what do you hope is the big takeaway from readers when they finish this book? I mean, really, and when I was reading The Broken Road, I thought to myself how I thought about what you just said, that there are some people who are willing to kill to protect their secrets. They're willing to kill or do anything they have to do in order to protect their lives. What do you hope people take away from your book, The Broken Road, or anything that comes from you in the future?
Well, that's a very good question. With The Broken Road, there are a number of things that I wanted to highlight. First and foremost, I have to say the exploitation of women that occurs in the wake or in the aftermath of a natural disaster, it's mind-boggling. These contractors come into small communities, they set up these offices or sex shops, and they hire these young women and they promise them the world. And there's one catch. You have to sleep with the boss. And then after you sleep with one boss, he introduces you to another and another and another. And if you don't comply, you're fired or you're demoted. And so one of the takeaways is that shouldn't happen. And that's one of the reasons why, one of the main reasons why I stepped to the forefront with The Broken Road and decided to write it was to end the exploitation of women. There needs to be reform in the way that these companies do business and in the way that these men behave. And, what I witnessed, it was mind-boggling. And as you know already, a lot of that stuff has been recorded and is on my website. So you can actually see the pictures of a supervisor with two of his young employees, female employees, laying on his lap. He's giving them, these underage women, alcohol, and there's cocaine in the room. I thought that was wrong. I thought that needed to be exposed. I thought that needed to be stopped. And so that's one of the main reasons. Another reason is because we are in tough economic times, and these large companies, I saw several articles where the government was going after a number of people who committed fraud and stole $2,000 or $3,000 in Red Cross money and so on and so forth. And I thought it was a good thing that they were going after these people. But when I started working for this company and became a supervisor and actually saw what was going on behind the scenes, I also realized that these companies are stealing millions and millions of dollars from the United States government. And the government hire these companies to provide oversight, but the government isn't overseeing the company. So I wanted to give several steps through this book that the government can take to make sure that these companies aren't railroading them and taking them to the cleaners. And I'm proud to say tonight that just last week, the Department of Homeland Security out of Washington, D.C., contacted me, and they want me to serve as an advisor to them on how to stop fraud and corruption after natural disasters. That, to me, was one of the greatest compliments that I could have ever received from a government that just 2 years ago painted me as an extortionist, and now they want me to become an advisor. So those are the takeaways. People need to know that these things are happening in their neighborhoods. And it's just not hurricanes that when these things happen. It's all forms of natural disasters. It's floods, earthquakes, wildfires, so on and so forth. These companies move in to clean up, but you need to know what's going on in your backyard, and that's what the Broken Road offers. It offers the readers a chance to understand who these people are, what their jobs are, and what they're doing in your community. So it's an eye-opener for everybody, I believe.
All right. Again, our guest today has been Keifer Bonvillain. He's the author of the book, The Broken Road. Keifer, we definitely appreciate you being a guest on our program this evening. And for our listeners, we thank all of you for joining us for another edition of Conversations Live. Now, keep in mind, if you missed any part of this conversation, about 5 minutes after we go off the air, you can catch the entire discussion by going to www.conversationsliveradio.com. That's www.conversations, with an S, liveradio.com. You can download it there completely for free, save it to your computer and to a disk. We're going to be back tomorrow, Friday, at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central for our afternoon edition of our program. Until then, enjoy your day, enjoy your life, enjoy your world. Make sure you take out time to enjoy some good music and also a great book. Thanks for listening to Conversations Live. Have a great night.